You are listening to the Innovators Behind Disruption, a podcast series brought to you by Evolve ETFs. The world is evolving. Your investments should too.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to this episode of the Innovators Behind Disruption. My name is Raj Lalla, the CEO of Evolve, and I'm also joined by a good friend of mine, Amit Monga. Actually, I should say Dr. Amit Monga. I always call him Amit. Amit and I have known each other for a few years now. He was a managing director at CIBC involved in technology and innovation, and he has a lot of experience in that area of the market, of course, and also has his PhD in mechanical engineering, but definitely focused in on artificial intelligence. So we're going to be talking quite a bit about that and a number of topics on today's webinar. So listen, thanks, Amit, for joining us.
Hey, Raj, thanks for having me.
So why don't we start by perhaps you could share with everyone a little bit about your background.
Sure. I mean, I think you kind of captured it nicely. Mechanical engineer by training, and then did my PhD in mechanical engineering as well, but really focused on artificial intelligence applications and machine learning applications. And I really kind of, zeroed in on an application of this area called genetic algorithms for reliability-based design, which now today is very relevant to some of the stuff that we're going to talk about in infrastructure. But in terms of the career, spent time in venture capital, and then also have started 2 software companies, and then most recently spent, for the past 15 years in investment banking, focusing primarily on technology, so software and IT services. So primarily covered all the large cap technology names in Canada.
So why don't we start with infrastructure, because I think it's a really interesting area that a lot of people don't necessarily attach technology to, because they automatically think of things like bridges, airports, roads when they think of infrastructure. But our infrastructure has changed a lot because of technology. Things like data centers, cloud computing, those are all examples of today's infrastructure. Why don't you talk a little bit about how you've seen that entire industry evolve?
No, that's actually excellent, Raj, because I think a lot of times people have a hard time understanding what infrastructure is all about. And obviously infrastructure has evolved. But let me kind of establish first the definition of infrastructure and maybe perhaps create a framework for discussion. And then you're going to see over time, as we talk about this, how all that is now technology enabled. So if I was to really go back and talk about what infrastructure is, from a core definition point of view, it's really a set of fundamental facilities and systems that actually are serving a country or a city or a region that are absolutely critical for its economy to function. So going back to some of the the areas that you identified. So infrastructure is composed of public and private physical structures, such as roads, railways, bridges, tunnels, water supply. But then on top of that, now you also layer electrical grids and telecommunication, which is very, very critical. And there I would also include internet connectivity and broadband access as well. And as you probably can understand, like how important infrastructure is today, as we talk about the future, which is going to be around connected kind of roadways that are talking to each other at in real time, tracking our what is the traffic and where do we have issues, and proactively kind of addressing it, the autonomous cars. The whole infrastructure is now becoming what we call smart infrastructure.
Yeah, and I would say as an extension to that, where do you see kind of the adoption changing for technologies pre-pandemic and post-pandemic? Because when the pandemic kicked in, a lot of people started to learn more about the technologies or demand the technologies that they weren't necessarily using before. For example, a lot of people were never using video conferencing prior to the pandemic, or if they did once in a blue moon. Now it's become a part of our daily lives. Other areas like cloud computing, cybersecurity obviously became very important during the pandemic. Do you look at pandemic as kind of creating that shot in the arm for adoption? Are there areas of technology that you think were only used during the pandemic and are not going to be adopted long term?
Sure. No, I think that's an excellent point, because there was pre-pandemic, then there was during pandemic, and then there is now life post-pandemic kind of a thing, right? So maybe if we kind of divide that into three areas, and it's very interesting, how some of those things have kind of impacted. So obviously the easy stuff, let's start with the easy stuff. Video conferencing, work from home now. Just talking to a friend of mine who just got a job. And the first question I asked him is, you have to work from the office or can you work from home? And he said, oh, actually it's going to be 3 days in the office and, 2 days at home. But as you know, you work all the time kind of a thing. So right off the bat, the ability to provide that very critical infrastructure around broadband becomes super critical. So back in the day, we talked about these different plans in terms of, how much kind of bandwidth do I need in the house? And then, how much data, should I have unlimited data or not? Now it's a given, you've got to have unlimited data, right? So that's kind of number one. So that's from a service provider perspective. But from a government infrastructure point of view, they need to kind of make sure that they have partnerships with telcos so that we actually have that foundational piece to kind of deliver that. So the second thing I would talk about is actually, this is very interesting. A lot of the smaller towns, when they started kind of attracting, people from the city because of affordability issues and so on, I was talking to one of the mayors of a smaller town, and he was mentioning that one of the things they need to kind of work on is upgrading their water treatment system. So for example, there are more and more people now going into these smaller towns, so they need to kind of upgrade that. They basically need to expand the facilities. So that becomes all of a sudden like, a residual kind of effect that needs to kind of be incorporated into our kind of modeling. The other thing is around how do we define kind of, roadways going forward? If we're going to have more and more, electric cars and smarter cars, do we still need the same number of lanes? In the future, will we have like dedicated lanes, for example, for transportation, where there are these autonomous trucks? We have that in Germany, for example, where the trucks are going back and forth from destination A to destination B on a straight kind of line, if you will. So a lot of those kind of things will now start coming into play. And it becomes more and more critical for the planners to kind of think ahead around that. And then around smart kind of infrastructure, there is a component that's very close to my heart, is around smart grids. So how do you kind of make sure that these different regions and areas are now kind of, have resilient power available to them? So whether it's kind of, solar, battery, or kind of, how do you store some of this information, energy, so all that kind of becomes a very, very critical kind of piece as well.
So you mentioned government in that part. You mentioned autonomous cars. We have an ongoing bet internally as to when we will actually have self-driving cars on the road. What's your theory? When do you think we will actually see them in Canada, like truly operational and legalized?
I think we started seeing some pilots of kind of autonomous cabs already in San Francisco.
Yes.
I've seen some videos on social media. It's incredible. I think I would say in the next 10 years, like I think there would be no thing like, we would just assume that autonomous is going to happen. So I think when you in the future, or you have a ride sharing app that you kind of pull up, you will be able to see that, whether that's with a driver or without a driver. And I would say 80% of the time that would be basically autonomous. That's kind of my prediction. And we talk about 10 years, but I would say that will start happening sooner than later.
Yeah, when we launched we launched a cars ETF about, just under 5 years ago. and the ongoing, my daughters were 9 years old at that time. And I remember saying to people that I think that by the time they're 16, that they won't need to drive. They won't need to go and get their driver's license. Well, they're 14 now. And I would say that I'm going to lose that bet because I'm pretty sure we're not going to have self-driving cars on the road in the next couple of years. But I think you're right. I think we're getting closer. And, a friend of mine runs a company that creates transmissions for electric vehicles. So he's pretty involved in the entire automotive sector. And his theory is even more far-fetched or further out. He says that within the next 20 years, he thinks it will become illegal for a human to drive a car because autonomous cars will be safer on the roads. So it'll be interesting to see where our government goes with this. Also, the ancillary sides of it, which is, how does insurance work if you eventually have autonomous cars? But it's definitely, I believe that, the automobile is going through not just the biggest transformation of our lifetime, but potentially the biggest transformation in history between the electrification and the technology going into self-driving cars.
I think you're right on. And I think there's obviously the critical piece here, which is the car by itself. Then there's a rider that basically is part of that. And then from there, you basically are looking at everything that you need around that to support that, infrastructure and ecosystem. So starting with the roads, they need to be optimized for certain type of delivery of that kind of, mobility, if you will. And then how would you, majority of them would be electric. And then how do you kind of make sure that you actually have infrastructure to charge them efficiently? In my opinion, I think this gives us, the more autonomous things we have, the more opportunity we have for, in my opinion, energy optimization, cost optimization. And I think what's going to happen is as we continue to kind of move down that path, you will see that we will become much more efficient in terms of our energy consumption. And, we continue to kind of move forward with more kind of, our sustainability goals kind of as well. So, like, for example, like the car would know exactly, what time to leave and what time to arrive. It would know exactly after dropping you, where it should charge itself before it goes and picks up someone else. And then think of all the downtown spots, Raj, that we will have access to as well. So all of a sudden, like, the 4 levels of parking that we have underground and will become available as well. So there's an impact on real estate as well. Like, so there are a whole bunch of kind of, other things that will start to happen. So is that space become all of a sudden, available for other uses? I think that's something for us to kind of, think about as well. So there is going to be unlocking of a whole bunch of kind of, resources that currently are locked in the old way of kind of doing things. So I'm really excited about that part as well. So for example, I can see downtown Toronto, all of a sudden we have access to a lot of this interesting space. Now, whether that can be stored for, storing distribution items, items that will be delivered to downtown and things like that. So all that stuff kind of comes into the play now.
You can see it. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think the shared model is a huge potential model for the automotive sector. I believe the stat that I saw was that less than 10% of the time a car is being actually used. So it's basically sitting idle for 90% of the time.
Exactly.
And a depreciating asset at the same time. But when you talk to younger people today, a lot of them, unlike our generation where we were so excited to turn 16 so that we could go and get our driver's license, because what that did for us when we were that generation or that age was it equated to freedom.
Yeah.
When you had your driver's license, you didn't need to rely on your parents anymore. You could, or your bicycle, you could go out there and have fun with your friends. But in today's world, more than half of the people that are 12, 13, 15 years old have no interest or intention of getting a driver's license because they're probably going to use a shared or a paid like an Uber service instead, and they have more options to deal with, or they're becoming greener in their thinking, and they want to take public transit instead of a combustible engine vehicle. So I think that as the preferences change, the dynamics of the industry will change. The comment that I made before about how in the next 20 years we won't see human drivers on the road. Whenever I say that to people our generation, they say, no way, I love my car, I love driving. And I understand that, but there's a whole new generation coming up behind us that don't love driving as much as we do, and have many other alternatives to access. So anyways, it's a super interesting industry. And I guess maybe it'd be worthwhile to kind of shift topics, although artificial intelligence is related to things like cars as well, but shifting over to AI. Oftentimes people, when they think of artificial intelligence, they think of robots, they think of a technology that could displace them in the labor force going forward. How has AI evolved over the last 5 years? And how do you see it evolving over the next 5-10 years?
I think, first of all, I think back in the day, we used to talk about like AI. Now I think what you're going to see is slowly AI is already being embedded into your kind of into day-to-day stuff, right? So even if you look at your iPhone, for example, when I kind of do the search, first thing in the morning, it knows I'm going to look at Wall Street Journal, I'm going to look at Bloomberg, and I'm going to see FT. And it also adds a little thing around, maybe you want to text this person. Usually it's my wife, right? So because I'm telling her, hey, this is the game plan, I'm leaving now, and so on. So that's like looking at your existing data, kind of looking at the patterns, and just do a gentle kind of push on recommendation, which is actually awesome, because a lot of times I wouldn't say which source, but one of the kind of, news sources I kind of look at in the end, and it says, hey, you haven't actually looked at this today. So it's like, okay, perfect. I pay for it, so I should kind of look for it. The other one would be, I think, then getting into more of a predictive kind of recommendations, if you will, that are going to be, important for you. So for example, you kind of, coming out of your driveway and it's saying, by the way, your door is not locked. Now, maybe you left it intentional for someone to kind of come in, but it just wants to give you a heads up, but that's what's going on. So I think that's great. There you basically draw a line in terms of, how much, you want the system to kind of recommend and share and things like that, right? And then the other thing is, like, I just recently, a friend of mine got a Tesla Y, and it has like a whole bunch of information on your driving now already available for you. So you can either say, hey, this thing is kind of monitoring how I drive, or you can actually use that to improve, your driving, right? So what's going to happen now is this data is going to start getting processed, and it will start giving you these recommendations in how you do things. The other application would be in the education world, right? So online learning, for example, the embedded algorithms now already know what things you learn faster, what things you learn slower. Is there a way for us to kind of use that to our advantage, right? So am I not going to spend more time doing X versus Y and things like that? And then obviously operationally, there's uses in energy, for example, like, you obviously have rain sensors, but having embedded kind of, moisture sensors and saying, where should I get more water, versus fertilizer and so on, to kind of optimize yield and things like that. So I think what you're going to find is, back in the day, it was like specialized algorithms. You had to buy AI kind of, modules, if you will, for your software. Now it's embedded, and in the future, it'll be in the box already, taken from that's already built in. And then from there, you decide how do you kind of take it to the next level. I think what you're going to find is a lot of the kind of, day-to-day stuff will start getting optimized very, very quickly. And I think I like that, because we're moving towards a world of efficiency. We're moving towards a world of, conservation, and so on, right? So I'm a firm believer that technology is going to make our world greener, more efficient, and so on. And going back to your kind of, usage, for example, like maybe next time you decide that you want to go grocery shopping, it's going to say like, this is not the time to go grocery shopping because there's going to be a lot of traffic. Right now, you actually have to kind of, put the Waze on or, any of the other apps. But I think what's going to happen is on a Friday night, it's actually going to give you a saying, hey, if you do want to do grocery shopping, 8:25 will be a good time to leave, right? So if we can start kind of incorporating some of those kind of recommendations, I think that's already happening, right? So that's getting embedded in our platforms. So I think that I like that.
So staying with AI, how is it changing the world of finance and the world of investing?
I think a lot of people have taken, tried algorithmic kind of trading, as we all know. I think that world is still not perfect at this point in time. I mean, 20 years ago, I did a course of stochastic models in finance, and there was this concept called martingales, like where basically it tries to predict stuff that hasn't happened before, which we all try to kind of predict. Even today, like is this kind of near-term recovery in S&P 500 short-lived, or is this going to be long-term? How do we go from there? I think whether the algorithms will be, algorithms can trade today. I mean, there are statistical models that are out there. I think the ability to kind of provide, I think, decision-making kind of modules at the right place at the right time for human intervention, I think is a good combo, I think, in my opinion. So you have a whole bunch of like, statistical models and AI-driven models that basically are telling you, these are a bunch of things that you should consider. Because a lot of times the stuff that we don't consider is the stuff that we missed, right? So I think the AI's ability to kind of, track how do you make these investment decisions, for example. I mean, if you're a portfolio manager and saying, hey, Amit, like last time when you did this, you actually didn't consider these macro factors. I just want you to know, actually, the commodities pricing is going down, even though there's a war, and this is the reason why. And you might want to consider that as part of your decision making, if you will. So I think what we're going to find is more and more smarter kind of tools becoming more and more available that you can decide whether you want to use it a complete autopilot, so which is algorithmic trading. Do you want to use it as a kind of a nice add-on to have, so that next time you're making a decision, all these things are popping up? Or you want a hybrid model where it gives you a nudge. Hey,
sure.
And then you kind of go from there. And I think what I love is, back in the day, a lot of this stuff was driven by mathematics. I think now what I'm finding is the technologies are evolving, and we can take more and more qualitative data, incorporate that into our kind of models as well. So which I think will be very interesting to watch.
Good. So we're going to close off with you pulling out your crystal ball and trying to forecast what you think will be the 5 most important technological developments over the next 10 years.
I think the number one, in my opinion, is going to be that we will start to kind of have faster processing power. And within that, I will split that into 2. I think our ability to process the availability of high quality chips, for example, faster chips with the cost coming down. I think we're going to find more and more faster chips on our handheld devices, which basically then gives us the opportunity to process information on the fly, kind of a thing. Sure. The second piece is going to be around connectivity. I think as we talk about 5G today, I mean, one of the big telcos, the CTO is a good friend of mine. And, all we talk about is all the use cases. And today it's like, we laugh like, 5 years out, we're going to say, hey, you know what? Remember when we used to talk about this? It's like, yeah, you and I talking about electronic health records, WebMD days, right? Back right. In 1995. Yeah. So I think that connectivity is going to be just there. right? It's not even an issue. You're not doing the phone and trying to see around connect. It's there, right? So I think the moment that happens, and the moment you basically have a very complex software that actually can run on that connectivity, the applications are infinite. And I think the piece that is going to be very, very important for us is that goes back to transportation and infrastructure. Now we actually have access about a certain asset location in real time. And I think that creates a huge, huge impact on how we kind of do things. So I would say starting with the faster chips, then connectivity and the software that actually sits on it. And then, really kind of how do you harness that information for decision-making day to day. But I think the biggest impact it's going to have is going to be on the infrastructure and how we consume energy, how do we consume different resources, and then have the ability to kind of, focus on things that are more important for us.
This was great. Thanks, Amit. We'll have to bring you back because there's so many other things to talk about. I wanted to bring up data privacy as it relates to artificial intelligence, but that's another 20-minute discussion. So we'll do that another time. But thanks again for your time, and thanks everyone for listening into this podcast.
Thanks, Raj, for having me. Thank you very much.
You have been listening to the Innovators Behind Disruption, a podcast series brought to you by Evolve ETFs. Remain educated, be informed. Sign up for our newsletter and learn more at evolveetfs.com.